Hello, everyone, and welcome to Traffic Corner Tuesday. My name is Paul Curra, Client Relationship Manager at SPAC Enterprise, and I'm your host for today's webinar. Traffic data is the foundation for all transportation planning, as well as updating signal timing programs. Yet, some of our industry are still using methods developed in the 1950s. Today, we'll be discussing how to set up an effective traffic counting program using modern methods and techniques. Please join the conversation by using the chat box on your screen to ask questions or share your experience throughout the presentation. We will try to work your comments in as we go, and we'll also do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. You can always email Mike or myself if you think of a question later. The Traffic Corner Tuesday webinar series is brought to you by CountingCars.com, which is part of the SPAC Enterprise family of companies. SPAC Enterprise consists of a group of traffic engineering companies focused on helping you create healthy transportation systems and fixing broken ones. Please visit our websites, CountingCars.com or SPACConsulting.com, to schedule your consult call and discuss your needs. From transportation equipment to traffic counting to engineering studies, we want to help you succeed. Now, today's presenters are Mike Spack and Brian Fiesick. Mike is the creative force and principal writer for the industry-leading blog, Mike on Traffic, as well as he co-hosts these webinars with, he also co-hosts these webinars with Brian. Brian is the vice president of SPAC Enterprise and regularly contributes to the Mike on Traffic. Now, together, they have over 45 years of experience in traffic and transportation engineering.
It's been that long.
It's been that long, Mike. Starting with being interns and sitting at an intersection corner counting traffic with clipboards. So let's dive right in. Mike, Brian.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, thank you,
Hi, everyone. So, and when we were using clipboards, it was pencil and paper on those clipboards, not one clipboard per car.
Yeah, to give you, to put that experience in context, which is always fun. So as we dive into our webinar here, we're going to turn off the video. We're going to let you focus on the presentation. And we will start there right now, getting into some background.
Okay, yeah, background, we're going to start at the big macro level before we zoom into traffic counting and what we recommend. In starting out, I assume most of you have heard of the 80-20 rule, that in a lot of different ways, the first 20% of an effort actually gets you 80% of results. And this is a very good kind of overarching principle for us to think about when we're thinking about traffic engineering and our data collection. And the history on that is Vilfredo Pareto back in the late 1800s figured this out, that in a village in Italy, about 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the people. And it's been proven over and over again in economic systems. Richard Koch and Perry Marshall have written great books around the Pareto principle, as it's been named. And where it really is headed, and the first big aha was around wealth around the world. The example of this 80-20, that about 20% of the countries in the world control 80% of the wealth. And then you drill down into those 20%, and the next 20% control 80% of the wealth. So you get into the United States and Japan and Britain. They own 20%. And then you break that list down and you find the United States at the top. And then you start breaking it down even further, all of the way to realizing, if you look at the wealth data, that the Walton family and Bill Gates control 80% in that top 20 and top 80% list.
80% to the 80%.
So you can multiply 20% times 20% times 20% on one side, but then you multiply 80% by 80% by 80%. And for those engineers out there, this is a fractal system. And we like this as an overarching theme to drive down on what actually matters. If 20% of our effort is going to give us 80% of the results, let's focus on that 20% first.
Let's make sure we get that right, and then we can focus on the minor details at the end if we need to.
Yes, and interestingly, the data I've looked at, and I don't have the scientific study in front of you, but it looks like our systems, that when we look at our federal highway, our interstate system, carries the majority of the ADTs, the volume, the VMT, the volume miles traveled. Then we drill down to the state roads, then we drill down to the county, then we drill down to the city. And when we look at each of those jurisdictions by themselves, 80% of their traffic is on 20% of their roads. And so I don't know if it's chicken or the egg, which came first, but we have a hierarchy, at least in the United States, going down from federal level all the way to the local level that follows this fractal 80-20 pattern. And no matter which jurisdiction you're working in, focusing on the 80-20 of your jurisdiction is the right thing to do.
Okay. All right, so with that background then on the 80-20, we're going to circle back to that just to give you that preview. But now why are we counting? Why do we have traffic counting programs to begin with? And what we've come up with is there's really two reasons.
Yeah, the first reason is strategic planning, that hopefully all of your communities have a comprehensive big picture plan. And we are really collecting data to find out if we're getting close to triggering one of those actions in the strategic plan of, do we need to widen a road? Do we need to add turn lanes to an intersection? All things that are hopefully flagged in your comprehensive
Different
plan.
traffic control, all those types of improvements that we're talking about. That's why you monitor the system.
Yes. And then there's a second kind of subset reason that we do traffic counting, and it's when conditions change enough along an intersection or a corridor that we should go out there and update the signal timing to make sure we're still providing good service for that changed traffic pattern. So that's other reason traffic counts are used.
And I will say this is one that we do not do enough. It's starting to get more life, kind of a sidebar issue here, but signal timing has a great improvement on reducing delay, environmental benefits, all this. So this is my own little plug of, you should be looking at your signal timing and you should be looking at it regularly.
Yeah, ITE came out, Institute of Transportation Engineers, with a big report about a decade ago that showed updating signal timing to have the highest ROI of anything in our industry as far as the cost to the payback to society. And they recommend updating signal timing every 3 to 5 years. But as you'll see through our presentation, we'd like to be a little more nuanced about that.
Yeah, but anyway, so sidebar, but just a little plug. If you're not doing that, please start. All right, so then we get into the monitoring plan. So we've established why we have the counting. And so now what does it mean to have a monitoring plan?
Yes, so we're really we want to get back to monitoring, checking in against the strategic plan. And I like the story of when somebody goes to Home Depot or Lowe's and they buy a drill bit, they actually don't care about the drill bit. They want to drill a hole in their wall, and let's say they're hanging a bookshelf. They actually don't even want the hole in the wall. They want to hang up the bookshelf. But why are they hanging the bookshelf? Well, it's to display books. And is it them who wants to display books, or is it their significant other? So kind of peeling back the layers of the onion of why are we doing this? That's traffic counts are a means to an end. They're not the end in themselves. So what are we doing with this data?
Yep. And so as we look at this plan, that gets back to the two reasons that we had. We're monitoring for that strategic planning and the signal timing. So just keep that in mind as the reasons for your plan. So then we get into the data collection. So how do we set this up? As we look at the data, what should we be collecting essentially? And the first one is always default to what somebody's telling you to do.
Do what you're told. We're good engineers. We're obedient. At least here in Minnesota, and I know a lot of other states, that certain jurisdictions are required to provide certain traffic counts up to the state level, which provide them up to the federal level. And the carrot along with that is that's how you tap into the gas tax funding and other funding mechanisms. It's a requirement. So obviously fulfill your obligations is step one.
Yep, pretty easy. A second one we have is the default to a 4-year cycle. So this comes out of mainly Minnesota. We do that. Most of our cities, most of our larger towns and cities have this default of collect data at least every 4 years to give us an idea of what's going on, what has changed, what those volumes are.
Yeah, so that's a default, and I'm going to call that a minimum threshold
Yes.
for your system.
So then beyond that, that's getting to some of the time frames and what the requirements are. You also want to cover all your collectors. So as a city looking at this, that's your 80/20. Collectors are going to be where most of your traffic is. So you should definitely cover those corridors where most of the traffic is. That's where your improvements are likely going to be, where you're going to have the most bang for your buck and what you really need to understand what's going on.
So to back that up just a little bit, for those, hopefully most of you know what our hierarchical functional classification system is, but the big roads are the arterials. Those are the interstates mostly. Then we have our minor arterials, which are getting into the state roads that aren't interstates. And then you break down some county roads are minor arterials, but then you get into major collectors, which can be county roads or city roads, and then get down to minor collectors, which are typically city streets, and then down to the local roads. And what we're saying is part of the 80/20 plan, data should be collected on all collectors and bigger, but because of federal and state requirements, we believe all the arterials and minor arterials are collected.
Yeah, usually they're already covered. They're part of your requirements that we have on step 1. So this is making sure you're covering the rest. If you're not required to, it's still a good idea to do that.
Yep. So this data collection is the equivalent of you're going to buy the drill bit. And the next step is, what are you going to do with that data? What are you going to do with that drill bit?
So the first thing is organize all the data, get it into a spreadsheet or something similar. I know there's GIS things where you can pop up the volumes on different ones, but there is something that you need to put all that data into one place so you can easily look it up. You can easily look at the historic data, see what has changed, enter in the new stuff. You definitely just want it into one spot.
Yes, and that should include all of the intersections and roadway segments, basically the rows of that spreadsheet, and then your data, the column should be year by year in that spreadsheet. And that kind of leads to the next point of, doesn't matter where the data is coming from. If we worked with the Ozarks MPO and through that process in their impact studies, they're now requiring 48-hour turning movement counts. And with a turning movement count, you get the ins and outs on each leg of the intersection, and that can be translated into your average daily traffic volume, your ADT. Well, get those numbers out of the impact studies and put them in your spreadsheet. It may save you from needing to do some tube counts later in the summer if you have that data already in your files.
And that can be done on more than just impact studies. There's corridor studies, there's improvement planning, all that stuff uses traffic data as the base. And that is all stuff that can be brought forward into this. So you've got it right there. And like Mike said, you can probably save some money from those requirements if you're doing it in other places. Why duplicate the work?
Well, and this is a great place for cross-jurisdictional collaboration of, okay, the county is studying their corridor. Well, those cross streets are probably local city street collectors, some of them. And if they're doing the turning movement counts, the city should get those numbers from the county. And likewise, if a city is updating signal timing, they may be covering a few county road corridors, and it can go the other way. So again, don't just keep, every jurisdiction doesn't need to cover every road. There can be a lot of sharing here.
Exactly. All right, so with all that in, you've got it in one spot. We're assuming a spreadsheet here, but you've got all the data ready. You've got it in the columns for the different years, and now you can calculate an annual growth rate. So just simply, what is your growth over time? How is that road? How is that particular segment increasing or not in volume?
Yep. And the second calculations you can do are calculate the volume to capacity ratio along each corridor. And this is go to the highway capacity manual. There's a table in there that gives kind of theoretical, what's the capacity of a 2-lane road, a 4-lane road, a 3-lane section, and just put those numbers in there so you can divide your volumes and see what that ratio is. Obviously 1.0 is theoretical maximum load that corridor can hold. But if your corridor is at a 0.2 ratio, you obviously don't need to worry about it.
Right. And this is where we mentioned the spreadsheet, because it's very easy to have this automated. You set the formulas in there. All you have to do is enter in the volumes and it can calculate this stuff for you. It's a very simple system that you can set up with a spreadsheet if you spend the time at the front end to set it up right.
Yes. And once you have it set up, an intern can maintain the system.
Exactly. So then with those calculations, what we are then suggesting you do is essentially essentially a signal. You have your red, yellow, and green, and you're flagging things that come up that reach certain thresholds. So in this case, if you are starting with a 4-year default and you see that your growth rate is greater than 5%, or your VC ratio is getting closer to that theoretical capacity, that can be a flag. It can turn that corridor yellow, or that segment, whatever it is. And then you know, hey, we need to look at this a little closer, which could mean doing counting more often. So you really know when you're going to hit different thresholds.
Right. And feel free to fine tune these growth rates and VCs, but we've kind of figured these are the starting points of that yellow territory. Of green, if you have rates lower than these, hey, your system's operating fine. There's nothing you should be doing. But once you get into this yellow zone of traffic's changing quickly, or hey, our corridor is starting to bump up into capacity issues, we have to trigger into what are we going to do? We need to start.
Yes.
This is the 80-20 of these are raising their hand. This is the 20% of your system that might need your attention.
And that again, bringing it back to what Mike talked about with that 80-20, that's what this is geared towards, is setting up some simple triggers so that you can get a great benefit without that much effort going into it.
Yeah, but it's also fine tuning it so you just don't say we're going to retime our signals every 4 years. If your city didn't grow at all, there was no development and traffic patterns didn't change, your signal timing may be fine for a decade.
Right.
But if Walmart was just dropped in at that signal a quarter mile away, hey, you're going to trigger one of these thresholds and it should raise its hand as, hey, my signal, we're busy over
Something
here,
happened.
patterns have changed.
Yep.
So it's going off of trying to be smarter and not just taking default years as the trigger points, but starting to get a refined system so you do the work when it's appropriate to do the work.
Exactly. All right, so we're pre-talking it a little bit here, but obviously you set the system up, you've done the data collection, and you've got it set up so you can easily review it with those triggers. What comes out of it? Well, like we were just talking, you've got your strategic planning and your mitigation. You don't have what you're going to do, but now you have an easy way for those corridors, segments, intersections, whatever it is you're monitoring to, like Mike said, they're raising their hand and saying, hey, something's going on here that you need to look at, and you may need to make improvements.
Yep. Or you may need to put it on the monitoring system that you're monitoring every year or two because you're getting close, but you're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, strategic planning, it could be the growth rate is at this, our volumes are getting close. We should start designing that 4-lane corridor or whatever it is we have planned next.
Get it into the capital improvement plan 6 years out, whatever the system is beyond this.
Yep. And then like we said, with the signal timing, it can, as the volumes grow, you can have that flag to go back and adjust your signal timing. And it might be in 2 years, it might be in 10 years if you don't have that growth, but it allows you to make those decisions.
So from there, let's talk about a case study. We're working with the city of Woodbury here in Minnesota and have really applied these principles to a traffic monitoring plan for them this year.
All right, so the first thing, like we talked about, in Minnesota, the state requires certain counts on specific roads, and it's just part of the whole funding mechanism. They have to do this, and they get funding to help maintain the roads. So we started with that as the required counts, and we did it a little differently this time because the required counts are really just tubes. They just want a number on a segment. What we are doing instead, we took those required counts, but we are looking at turning movement counts at intersections instead. And by doing 48 hours, we can pull the numbers back, know the ins and outs, and we can get the ADTs on all those roads. But then in addition to that, so we're covering those requirements, but now we are also providing specific turning movements through the intersection. We're getting both vehicles, peds, and bikes. So we're trying to expand it to cover all forms of transportation, not just the vehicles going through an intersection. And then we can also check for signal timing. We've got the counts now. If we think it needs to be updated based on a comparison to what's been there previously, we've got that information. We can make those signal timing adjustments. We can, 48 hours, we can split it down to here's your morning pattern, here's your afternoon. We can have that division. We've already got that base to set up the timing.
And we've talked about the benefits of 48-hour turning movement counts in past webinars. So if this is a new concept to you, please go to our YouTube page and look up the video from the past Traffic Corner Tuesday. But we're applying that logic here of get out there and get good data, but then make it actionable.
And then the last thing we did for Woodbury is we added in some additional collectors. So what was required covered most of their system, and by just adding a few more sites in, we're going to cover the rest of it. So we're covering their 80% without that much more work. So it was just talking with them. It was having a little more insight into what they're looking at and saying, as long as we're out there, we can do this for you as well.
Yeah, and two things we can add in as these plans develop is if you know you have a mid-block pedestrian crossing of a street that's busy and you're out there blanketing an area with data collection, well, put a camera out there and get the crossing count there. That may be actionable. And also, while we're working for Woodbury out there, when they get kind of citizen requests in for stop signs or speeding complaints, we're going to pop out there and put down tubes to get speed data. And if that happens to be at a place that we can eliminate some video camera counts or something else, we're going to reuse that data. And as time goes on and we develop the list of kind of the hot spots of where complaints come in, there could be a couple of places where we will proactively put out tube counters to get speed data, just so we know the complaint's going to come in the next year, and we could say, funny you raised that. We collected data out there 6 months ago and everything's fine. Here it is, and be proactive on it.
Yeah, and that's really what this is. It's a change from just doing the requirements or just doing what's needed for a study to trying to be proactive with your monitoring, with your traffic data collection, and really expanding it to let's start being systematic about what we're getting. Let's put it all together and let's get it before we even need it. And then we have it there. We know what we're going to use it for on other things. It's just, it's trying to think about it a little more holistically.
Okay, so now let's get into kind of our processes. And when we do traffic counts as Traffic Data Inc. or SPAC Consulting for a jurisdiction, and actually this document and process we are applying to everything we do in our company, from our accounting processes to shipping processes to data collection process. But if we zoom in here along the left-hand portion of our process, we believe it's always most important to start out with why. What's the purpose? Why are we doing this? And then to kind of give this some thought to the upfront of why are we doing it? How often? What triggers this? What is our promise? Our core value, one of our core values is we deliver on our promises. Well, having a clear promise makes it very easy to to know what we need to deliver on.
Mhm.
And then the measurable of we need this data by this deadline or this level of accuracy or whatever the measurable is. And this data, okay, we have an intern collecting the data and they may need to put it in the spreadsheet, and then they may need to file a report or talk to the assistant city engineer whenever one of these thresholds is triggered. So we'd like to think through, who do we need to pass this off to?
And what this does, it's a great way to get everybody on the same page. Having it down, having it thought through is amazing when you actually do it, because it's very easy for people to get crossed wires. They think different things. Everybody's moving in different directions. So this puts everybody at the same base point. We know what we're doing. We know why we're doing it. We know what we're going to be measured on, that sort of thing.
It has been shocking, the level of miscommunication, even though I thought we were great in our company, but just, it was like 5 people in a room speaking different languages, going through this process and realizing how different we were interpreting what we were doing.
All right, so with that all understood, kind of that top level sheet stuff, you get all that down, and then what we have set up are just the task underneath, just basic steps, basic milestones. And for this one, we're setting, somebody comes in, if we use Woodbury as an example, they've hired us to do the job. We set that project up so we know what we're doing. We move on to project tasks, which we have checklists for that we'll get to in a second. We have our QA, QC.
Make sure we did it right.
Yep, get that down. And then we have that delivery and handoff back to the city. And then as a subset, kind of at the back end there, not numbered, we have to maintain our equipment. So that's just, again, it's a major step within this, not necessarily for this specific project, but just making sure overall, all our stuff is working in good shape and we don't have any issues. So if we pull that out a little bit more, going from those major steps, one of the things we have there are these checklists here. So again, top level stuff, what we write down, what's our project? We have project numbers, keeps track of things. We have our deadlines, internal, external, who's doing it, when they're going to be out there, what they're using. So try to get all that down so we know what's going on. We can go back and check if we need to, but we have this stuff physically printed off.
Yeah, and we have bins with our tools and our accessories, nails and those things, but we want to say, okay, here's how many cameras you need to take out for this project, or here's how many tube counters you need to take out for the project. So kind of the big level thing, just like pilots need to walk around the plane and check everything out before they take off. Make sure before we get in the work vehicle and drive out to the site, everything has been checked out.
Yep. And so thinking back to the previous slide, this is kind of our project setup, or part of the project setup. And then we get into the specific tasks. We have this checklist of what we're doing, going through. We're not trying to detail every step here.
This is an 80-20.
This is another 80. This is the 80-20 within the 80-20. So we've got those steps down, and then towards the bottom of the sheet, you can see we've got the third and the fourth step there with our quality control check, just making sure it was done. We have the boxes next to all these so people can put their initials, and you can always go back and check who did what. And then finally making sure it gets delivered to the client. And really important for a small business, make sure you invoice so you can get paid for it. Yeah. So that's our checklist and how we have developed our 80-20 of the 80-20, kind of drilled down to, if we're following these steps and people are doing this, we should get the effort in, our project should go well. And yeah, just kind of a way to make sure we're putting effort into the right areas.
Okay, well, I see we're at 1 o'clock, and so thank you. kind of landing here right on time. Happy to answer a few questions. If anyone has any, they want to type into the chat box. And of course, if you have any questions later, feel free to email me. And as our little warm up talked about, we do have the traffic counting manual. The third version of that will be coming out. And we've made some updates. And if anyone wants to preview that for free and provide me your comments, would love to see that. So shoot me an email at mspac@countingcars.com and we'll get you a PDF of the update. Not the final version, but a draft mode. I'm sure there will be a typo or two in there that haven't been caught, but would love your thoughts.
Gregory asks, how effective are single traffic counter tubes versus cameras?
It depends on the volume of the road. So with cameras, you are getting at least 95% accurate, but hopefully more 98, 99% accurate, no matter how slow those vehicles are moving, how congested it is, what the traffic conditions are out at the spot. Tube counters, especially if it's a single tube, if it's in a congested area or slow moving traffic, the accuracy goes haywire. That tubes are designed to work with zero congestion, traffic not going two directions at precisely the same time.
More than 10 miles an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, there are specific conditions that are necessary for the tubes to work as effective as they are designed to.
And again, I'm beating the drum of the 80-20 analysis of your tube counters probably, well, there's an 80-20 of the bottom 80%, the lower ADT roads, especially in a city, the local streets, those could be adequately collected with a single tube. Then there's a next jump of the 80-20 where you should probably put out two tubes. That'll help get more accurate data. And then there's the next fractal of the 80-20 where the cameras will get you more accurate data. But with all that said, with Woodbury, we're going the other way because we're finding it cost effective to put out cameras for them, and it gets much better data, and we know it's going to work.
A side benefit, well, I'll call it a side benefit, but we think it's a very big benefit as well, is when we put out cameras, we are on the side of the road. We don't have any of our personnel running out into the road, trying to put a tube down across. So just a much safer situation. So that is another reason why we are moving towards cameras and whenever we can.
And that is, all of you to watch, is DuPage County is one of our great clients over at Counting Cars, and they have a top-down mandate from administration that they can't justify the risk of putting people on the street. So in every way, Public Works is supposed to figure out how to minimize people being on the street, and they came to us and they're switching over to all cameras. And Minnesota is going down similar paths. We hear that coming from MnDOT. We've seen similar things from many state level DOTs that once we're out on busier minor arterials and arterials, county roads and state roads, putting out tubes is more than 0% unsafe. I mean, occasionally in my career, a couple of people have been hit, and I know of a couple of fatalities with people putting out tube counters. So again, 80-20 analysis, as things get busier on your roads, make sure you please have a second person in the vehicle just to watch the person working back and to take it slow and, I mean, be safe. It's a traffic count. Don't risk life or limb over a traffic count.
Follow up to that question, are single individual counters effective? The city of Gastonia uses single counters, one per lane, and the city seems to be having issues with them.
Yeah, it's very situational for all those other reasons that sometimes they work in some conditions, but in other conditions.
Yeah, there are a lot of conditions that they work really well. So don't take this as we're bad mouthing all tube counters or anything. They provide good data. They can give speed data that you can't get from a camera yet. They provide classification that you can't always get from a camera. So there is a place for them. But It's just you have to be aware of the limitations. And so if you're trying to put a tube between driveways where there's a lot of turning movements, it's not going to be as effective because you have cars hitting the tube at a skewed angle. They're going slower. You just have to understand the limitations and know where you're putting them.
Yeah, and I'm going to also argue that there are plenty of old legacy single hose tube counters out there, the one channel tube counters that don't even allow you to do any analytics. They just click over a number on those counters. The price on tube counters has gone down so much, including our way count at countingcars.com, that having a two-channel, two-tube counter that is actually to the millisecond, beyond the millisecond accuracy, recording the axle hits in both directions on two tubes, really refines the situation.
The mechanical ones from way back when.
Yeah, and so with that said, you may be spending thousands of dollars of man hours trying to make, instead of making a few $100 purchase.
There's two questions here, one from Christina, one from an anonymous attendee that I'm going to combine quick. First of all, what brand program of cameras do you use? Are there concerns with residents about their privacy? Do you have issues with problems with cameras being installed on utility poles or having to obtain permits?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, several questions.
Do you want to jump in with starting points?
Well, I'll start with the one, privacy issues. That was definitely one of the questions. We are recording. The cameras are not to that high definition that we're going to be reading license plates. We're not, you're not going to be able to see people in the car or who's in the car, stuff like that. So one, there's not enough detail on there to, I guess, do damage, to put it that way. And two, we are in public spaces. So how much presumption of privacy should there be? Kind of two issues there. If you are going into a retail or an area that's private, that's where you just need to talk with the people, let them know you're going to be out there and let them know you're recording. But if you're on public right away, I don't see that as an issue.
Yeah, there may be jurisdictions out there that would require some type of permit to install the camera. But here at Traffic Data Inc., we just install them. We don't necessarily go to pull permits, and we haven't run into any issues with that.
Hasn't been a permit issue. We have given cities, there are certain cities who just like it when we give them heads up where we're going to be. So not necessarily asking permission, but just telling them, hey, we're going to be out here. You know, as a heads up, when you see something out there, that's our equipment. Another one to be proactive about is around schools. Anytime you are setting up something around schools, you should be talking to the administration, the principal, letting them know you're going to be out there. And I would go so far as have your field person stop in at the school, introduce themselves and say, hey, I'm going to be here and here setting this up. I'll be back in 2 days. Here's my business card. Contact me if you need. I mean, just be as forward as you can with schools.
Yeah, and then to cover the issue of where do you get these kinds of cameras, and this is at the heart of countingcars.com. I saw this need almost a decade ago as I saw it as an intern way back in about 1994, but came up with video camera technology, and we sell the units at countingcars.com. And if you have any interest in that, please go to countingcars.com, and there's a button right on the top, schedule a consult call, and you'll be able to schedule with our team a very non-committal half hour to just talk through your needs and to see if there's a fit for you. So happy to do that. We sell video cameras, we sell the data processing, ways for you to process your own, as well as our own brand of tube counters that we think are a big step forward technology-wise. So at Counting Cars, we're here to help with your hardware needs. And then Traffic Data Inc., if you have a bigger project you're considering outsourcing, reach out to me at mspac@countingcars.com, and we can talk that through, we're doing larger data collection projects around the country for different government agencies.
So thank you for setting that up on a tee and us hitting that.
Yep.
That was a nice setup question.
So with that, why don't we shut it down and say thanks, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.